What are your top 10 decks for June post Battles of Legend? Now make sure you guys smash the crap out of that Shaddoll button so you guys don't miss out on more content. This was kind of hard to decide where I wanted to put Shaddolls, but I think Shadolls definitely have potential to be top 10 right now because this deck just winda everywhere. You got some pretty good consistency. The only thing that I think a lot of us are going to agree on is with so many hand traps in the format, you know, watching your construct possibly get shut off or watching one of your key resolutions get ashed is gonna feel a little bit bad on certain things. Though, I will say, you could actually build Shaddoll into possibly some of the branded variants, and we're also probably going to see some of the Shaddoll stuff getting cited in some variants because the new Shaddoll monster just being able to basically be 3 dumps off of 1 Shaddoll fusion is pretty interesting in terms of, you know, builds that can be explored. So I definitely think that there's something to be had with the Shaddoll aspect of things. Now we have Sky Striker. Sky Striker has pretty much proven itself to still be kind of sitting here in the back of the room as kind of a decent powerhouse in the meta. You know, this deck's job is to be able to basically function on the bare minimalistic to be able to get the job done. And also, it's been playing the Radiant Typhoon package. The Radiant Typhoon package has just kind of given this deck some extra little gas in order to basically help it out. And honestly, I think having those little extra, you know, having the little Radiant Typhoon package be built into the deck, I think that actually helped the deck out. I think that was one of the things that the deck needed. Now, we all thought, you know, with the initial ban list that, you know, anything Radiant Typhoon related would just fade off into obscurity and Sky Striker would stop, you know, using, you know, the tools it had, but that hasn't been the case. Sky Striker's actually just evolved again to be able to keep up with the times. Which brings us to Maliss. Maliss, I had a really weird time wanting to still leave this in the top cut of the meta, but I think as long as Lancia has faded into the background, and as long as you're not dealing with any sort of that retaliatory hand trap usage, I feel that you're going to have a pretty good time playing into any sort of meta that could exist. The only downside you're going to have is your deck is so fragile because of the restrictions that, you know, you might just end up in a really bad, you know, choke pointed situation where the deck just kind of falls apart. I don't think that that's going to be the case necessarily every game, but it's enough that we kind of have to raise a little bit of a concern towards and go, all right, is this still going to be a consistent pile? And I mean, it's good enough to top 32 at YCS, which makes it matter. Now we have Mitsurugi, and I'm going to put the clowns with this as well, because Clown Mitsurugi has been still it's a pretty interesting topic of conversation, because, you know, these two are kind of overlaying with each other, but yet they're still functioning as their own separate decks. Pure Mitsurugi has been doing just fine. I think that the deck is absolutely wonderful right now in today's current existing meta. And it's going to continue to be a good, strong competitor. Meanwhile, you know, you have the clowns, which are trying to figure out, do they want to build into the Mitsurugi power? Do they, too, want to remain a separate entity to be able to, you know, do things? And, you know, coming off of the YCS, Mitsurugi Clowns was, I think, one of the top talked about rogue choices. But, you know, these two decks, they have the power to go together and still do things. But, you know, Mitsurugi will forever remain Mitsurugi. Anything you can usually stick that thing into usually is going to cause some problems. Which brings us to Elf Note. We don't get June Pride for another month. I do think when June Pride does initially come out, that I think that card is going to take Elf Note to a whole nother level. Now, there's also the discussion, you know, do we want to play Fiendsmith with this deck? You know, do we actually need the Fiendsmith cards in order to, you know, make the deck into a consistency piece? And I think the Fiendsmith stuff is a big help. I think it's one of those situations that, you know, if you kind of start to gut out the things that tend to make the deck a little bit consistent, then, you know, the game plan just kind of starts to fizzle away into obscurity. So I don't think we're going to want to do that. I think we want to leave this deck on its consistent notes. And obviously, you know, Fiendsmith or not, or, you know, if you're going to build it in with more of the Power Patron stuff, you can kind of navigate that window to do so. And then we're back to the DoomZ. DoomZ really showcased its power out of the early chunk of the meta here, showcasing that this deck can really just do so much madness. And the fact that, you know, you've got a walking, talking Thunder Dragon Colossus that's bigger than Thunder Dragon Colossus that these decks are using, you know, you also technically have access to Premature Burial. You know, most of the players are choosing not to play that version, which, I mean, is fine. I understand that, you know, it's not exactly the most exciting version of the deck, but it was a cool little tool that Konami tried to bring back to make DoomZ seem a little bit more popular. But this deck just continues to play through the power pieces. Jerpedo is an absolutely stupid good card. And, you know, depending on how much Power Patron access you've got built into this, you know, you can very easily just play through some boards. And that's exactly what you want to be seeing. And then, of course, Archmage. I love the fact that Archmage has somehow become like the better variant of the decks right now. And the reason for this is just because when you look at the way that Archmage was working, you know, you bridge into the Power Patron stuff, then all the Archmage stuff just goes extend, extend, extend. And it was really, you know, watching some of the top cut feature matches that we really got to see, you know, Archmage actually shine, you know, and watching the deck just fully reach its full potential is really crazy, especially, you know, relying on more of the board breaker approach to be able to clean up problems, I think is actually probably a decent way to consider going right now. So we will have to wait and see how, you know, the rest of the meta is going to handle this deck, but I think it's pretty clear what our answer is here, that Archmage is the best of the variants. Now, something a lot of players were agreeing on was the build that Jeff Jones had cooked up, the build that got 10th place, the Amorphage build of Power Patron. That deck is very, very, very scary. And most players were kind of agreeing that Jeff Jones might have had the best deck in the room. Just falling short of, you know, 2 necessary spots to make top 8. I think that deck, if we were in a top 32 scenario, could have actually eaten the competition alive. And I do think that the Amorphage deck is probably, you know, being able to bring out Sloth, being able to access a lot of those very, very, very powerful cards that particular deck has. I would not be surprised to see that actually, with more power behind it, that deck probably is the best deck in the room. But for now, you know, we need to see more results for that. Then we have Cool Tunes. So Cool Tunes fell a little bit short on what we were kind of expecting the results to be. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to see Cool Tune kind of fading into the background. It was still a very, very strong competitor deck in the very early stages, and we're going to continue. This deck is still going to be second best deck in the room. There's not going to be any changing about that. What you are going to have to deal with is, you know, more and more branded that's going to be coming around here. That's your real problem right now. You thought that the Cool Tune matchup was absolutely horrendous. Well, when the first best deck in the room starts to kind of overpower the second, that's where our meta is going to start to have a lot more of the fun, as we are going to say, or at least, you know, kind of what we're expecting, which, of course, like I said, your best deck in the room is branded, Draco Tail branded, you know, all of the variations of branded that exist. And Jesse might have exploited the system and shown us that, you know, Draco Tail probably is still a good variant to the deck, which we're going to have to wait and see, people, if that's going to hold true. But, you know, one thing we do know for sure going into Glorious Gallery here before Chaos Origins, you know, you've got some very scary decks to deal with here. So we'll see where these go. But please take a second to leave a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think. And some interchangeable pieces coming together. And that's exactly what I like to see. You guys have a good rest of your day, all right? Patrons, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.